little bit early, so I don't know if they're ready to go on Facebook, go online, or can I go ahead? Be all right? Okay. Glad to have all of you who stayed, and David, thank you again for bringing us that great message. I want to begin by saying, stick with me because I'll come to a point here at the end of all this nonsense. But generally, I go to bed and I'm out and I wake up the next morning. It's one of the great blessings. It's one of the things that still works for me among all the things that don't work so well anymore. But about twice a year, I just wake up in the middle of the night. And last night happened to be one of them. I popped up at 3 o'clock and I'm awake. And so I was up for a couple hours. I guess I'm guessing at the reason for it. I'm going to quote Ebenezer Scrooge when Jacob Marley appeared to him. He said, "You may be a bit of undigested beef, a blot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of underdone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave to you, whatever you are." My favorite line from the entire thing, there's more of gravy than of grave to you. But I think that's probably what was going on with me. So you take the 2 hours of missed sleep. I did go back to bed and get a little bit later on. And the 2 double espressos that I had to get me going this morning. I don't know what you got. I just apologize if it doesn't go well. We're going to look at the book of Malachi, the last of the minor prophets in our Bibles, the last in the Torah of, or not in the Torah, but in the canon of Jewish, the 12 as it's known. Probably chronologically the last also. Malachi probably was around 445 BC, after the return from Babylon, after the construction of the wall and the temple, and probably after the restoration of worship. And I say that because the worship is what he talks about. And he says, depending how you want to divide up the chapter, if you look at commentaries, they find 8 different ways to slice it up. But by our lesson plan, the 3 main points that they make at least are that the people have lost their, I don't like the word that our God used. I'll go ahead and use it, and then I'm going to maybe amend it a little bit. They've lost their fear in worship. They've lost their trust in giving to the Lord. And they've lost their faith in how they live. Now, going back to that first one, I would use the word they've lost their respect in how they worship. They've lost their sense of worship being real. They're no longer invested in their worship. Different ways you could put it. I understand that God actually uses the word fear, that a healthy respect or fear of God is part of what we should have. And yet, having established that as a foundation of my life, I don't fear God as I worship him. I'm not afraid of him, except in a good, healthy way. I would add possibly a fourth section of this this book, and that is chapter 4, which deals with prophecy about John the Baptist and about the coming Messiah. So the first point that they lost their respect in worship. Let's look at chapter 1, beginning in verse 6. And let me just make mention of the first 5 verses before that. It begins by saying, I have loved you, says the Lord. And the response, and this is the way the whole book is written, the response is, yet you say, in what way have you loved us? And we have a recounting of the descendants of Esau, the Edomites, and how they were the great enemy and stumbling block to Israel, would not allow them to pass through their country, actually fought against them when Jerusalem was taken, and how God says that, he says in verse 4, even though the Edomites say that they will go back and rebuild after he had destroyed them, God says they may build, but I will throw them down. They shall be called the territory of wickedness. So God's anger against the descendants of Esau was pretty much everlasting. And he says, but you I have loved, Israel. So we begin in verse 6. A son honors his father and a servant his master. If then I'm the father, where is my honor? If I'm a master, where's my reverence? Says the Lord of hosts. To you priests who despise my name. Yet you say, in what way have we despised your name? You offer defiled food on my altar. But you say, in what way have we defiled you? By saying the table of the Lord is contemptible, and when you offer the blind as a sacrifice, is it not evil? And when you offer the lame and sick, is it not evil? Offer it then to your governor. Would he be pleased with you? Would he accept you favorably, says the Lord of hosts? But now entreat God's favor that he may be gracious to us. While this is being done by your hands, will he accept you favorably, says the Lord of hosts? Who is there even among you who would shut the doors so that you would not kindle fire on my altar in vain? I have no pleasure in you, says the Lord of hosts. Now, this is a real physical example of the point that we want to take for us, and that is clearly when making sacrifices on the altar, it was spelled out, it was understood that you got unblemished examples, whether it be a goat or a ram or a dove. And so they've restored worship in Jerusalem, and with the priests being even involved in this, they're bringing the worst of their flock. They're bringing lame and blind and offering that to God. So we take that lesson ourselves. What do we bring with us when we come to worship? Now, it'd be really easy to take a turn here and make this about the form of our worship. I can't go to that church because they don't have 3 songs of prayer, the Lord's Supper, another prayer, and do it the right way. God's not talking about the form here. Bringing a lame, the worst you have to offer is about what's in your heart. It's manifested in what you bring, but it's about what's in your heart that you want to offer to God. Are you just going through the motions, or are you worshiping? And that should be our lesson. when we come here? Are we, for instance, this week, as Bruce mentioned, thankful, as we've been reminded by this holiday? Do we come here because our moms raised us to come here, or do we, which is not a bad thing, by the way, or do we come here because we want to express our love for God who provides for us, who has ultimately made these sacrifices for us in the form of his only son, who we attribute all good things to, and I can go on and on. Are we worshiping because we want to, rather than out of form? Certainly a lesson that we can carry from Malachi into our lives today. Welcome commentary at any point. Our guidebook here calls this spiritual amnesia that the Israelites had. And I am amazed as we read through the entire Old Testament how many times Israel turned away and forgot the law altogether and found it again and had worship restored. Apparently, even after the captivity and after going back and after longing for Jerusalem and being there again and having worship restored, here we go again. We're only going through the motions. Yes? I wasn't going to. I'm going to let you. Tony asked if I was going to talk about profane. Used here as you have profaned my altar. You have a comment? Please do.
I was just thinking about, it seems to me that I read at some point, it has something to do with the threshold. The word profane, which I knew, which I have a good memory of. You know, the idea that you're tracking things in from the outside. Some people, when they go into a house, take their shoes off. You know, and it kind of puts it down on the level so we can understand the idea of profanity or profaning the house of God. It's like to say it doesn't have to do with the techniques or the things like that. It has to do with our heart.
For those of you who are online and can't hear that, Tony brought up the idea of the word profane, whether it be the root of the word or whether it be an example, as tracking in dirt from outside across the threshold into a place. And yeah, to take what should be pure and right and to make it less, I think would be a good example. Well, the second point that our lesson makes is that God warns his people about having no trust in their giving. So let's turn to chapter 3, and I'm going to begin reading in verse 8. Will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me. Even this whole nation, bring all the tithes into my storehouse, that they may be food in my house. And prove me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out on you such blessing that there will not be room enough to receive it. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, so that he will not destroy the fruit of your ground, nor the vine fail to bear fruit for you in the field, says the Lord of hosts. And all nations will call you blessed, for you will be a delightful land, says the Lord of hosts. Now, I think here God is reiterating what he has told Israel over and over again. you follow my commandments. You worship me as I have instructed you to worship me. You tithe to me, and you will be blessed. You will be taken care of. You are my people, and I will take care of you. Now, we can take a bad turn with this section, as most TV evangelists seem to have taken, and that is we can now put God in our little box and call on him to bless us financially whenever we want him to. The prosperity gospel, as it's called. And it's really taking the particulars of the nation of Israel and God's relationship with them and stretching it a bit to say, you know, you give me exactly 1/10 of what I give you, and I'm going to give you all the money you'll ever need. And yet I think we are taught, Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount, for instance, that we can feel confident that God will take care of us. And he does. But here we have them holding back. And this is in a setting where tithing was a required part of their worship. And they're holding back. And God says, you know, once again, you've got amnesia. I've told you, you do this and I'll take care of you, and you're not doing it. And so he is displeased with them. Any comments there? Our third point is God warns his people of having no faith in the way they live. Now this one we can really take to heart and apply to ourselves again. By the way, giving people is something we certainly can take to heart too. I didn't mean to skip over that. Being people who give with the idea that we need not worry about God taking care of us. Let's read again in chapter 13, and I'm going to begin in verse 13 this time. Your words have been harsh against me, says the Lord. Yet you say, what have we spoken against you? You've said, it is vain to serve God. What profit is it that we have kept his ordinance, and that we have walked as mourners before the Lord of hosts? So now we call the proud blessed, for those who do wickedness are raised up. Yes, those who tempt God go free. Well, that probably is indeed the worst example of spiritual amnesia. To say to God, why are we bothering to do this? You know, you're taking care of the wicked. They live a better life than we do. Why would we follow these rules you've made for us? Now, that theme is found many, many times in the Bible. And to be honest, this is, if we go outside the confines of these walls at least, a common question in the mind of a lot of people. You know, the world seems to be doing fine. Why would we bother worshiping God or believing in God? You find this question raised in the 10th Psalm. You find it in Jeremiah. You know, why do the wicked prosper? You find it in many other places. Somebody tell me why the wicked prosper. They're smart. I think you have to define prosper for starters. There are many people who prosper financially, some because they do things the right way, some because they do them the wrong way. Climb over people or mistreat people or steal or don't pay their taxes or whatever. There are many who prosper financially and do it in a very right way. So we need to be careful about assuming how people got there, I think, sometimes. But all of that speaks to prospering financially. Are there other ways in which we prosper? I always go back to the great phrase that I love so much. We have peace that passes understanding. And if we take all of those who have greatly prospered financially, we might find that many fewer of them have that peace, that inner happiness. There are more than one ways to prosper. And yet, if you're just questioning God, as God says these people were at this point, it just gets to be awful easy to say, well, what I need to do the right thing. Yeah.
Frank, there's a strong connection between verse 17 of chapter 2 and these two verses that you're looking at right now. And the statement that God makes in verse 17 is that you have wearied the Lord with your word. And he goes on to say, how have you wearied me? But the fact that you are accusing God of being unjust.
Once again, for those online, we're going back to chapter 2, verse 17. Similar statement, you wearied the Lord with your words. When you say everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, you're basically saying God is unjust, that he doesn't call evil into account, and I think we all know the ultimate answer to this dilemma, the ultimate answer being, well, we're going to get to it later in the chapter, but we all know it. There is an ultimate day of the Lord, in which, well, let's go ahead and look at let's see which, well, chapter 4, we'll get in verse 1. Behold, the day is coming, burning like an oven, and all the proud, yea, all who do wickedly, will be stubble. The day which is coming shall burn them up, says the Lord of hosts. That will leave them neither root nor branch. But to you who fear my name, the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings. You shall go out and grow fat like stall-fed calves. You shall trample the wicked, for they shall be ashes under the soles of your feet. On the day that I do this, says the Lord of hosts. You know, I find that being a bit of a dilemma in my mind. If I am good with, I guess my favorite parable, which I think we've already mentioned today, the workers in the field who work different periods of time. If I'm good with my deal is guaranteed to me and that's what God's going to do for me, then I don't care what the deal is for anybody else. If you only work 30 minutes and you get paid the same with me, if I got paid what I was supposed to, I'm good with that, you know. So I'm not looking for the wicked to be trampled under my feet. I'm not looking for God to punish the wicked. I would be good at the last moment of judgment if God said, we're not going to do that. I'm not looking for revenge. I'm not looking for that to justify my way of living. And yet, I think God is clearly telling us that ultimately there is justice. Ultimately, that's going to happen. And once again, that's not my motivation for doing what's right. But we're told that. There's, as we already read, this reference to the Son of Righteousness shall arise with healing in his wings, this messianic prophecy. And then it goes on to say, in verse 5, behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. A reference, I believe, to John the Baptist, who would prepare the way for Jesus. These prophecies, along with all the other messianic prophecies in the Old Testament, bring me to a great moment of pause. And what I mean by that is these words, the last of the minor prophets, the last recorded prophecy to Israel, the last words about the coming Messiah and the one who would pave his way, came some 400 years before the coming of John the Baptist and Jesus. 400 years of, as far as we know, silence in the way of further prophecy. 400 years. That really makes me stop and think. It makes me think we lose sight. We become, we have that amnesia perhaps sometimes as it relates to Christ coming again. It's not something that's easy to keep believing in or keep in the front of your mind. 400 years. I'm reminded of the verse mentioned in, I think what I've got it written down here, 2 Peter. Do not forget this one thing, dear friends. With the Lord, a day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a day, in reference to the coming of Christ. Our time frame is not God's time frame. And so I asked myself the question, as Malachi speaks for God to the people of Israel here, to what extent do we find our worship and our hearts in the same boat that they were in? To what extent do we become complacent about all of these things and put them to the back of our minds? And to what extent do we, as I've mentioned before, show up and go through the motions, making sure those motions are the prescribed ones? You know, it's important, but not have it in our heart as we do it. Comments, please. Or we're going to be through really, really early, as happens with me quite often. Yes?
physical beings and not as eternal spiritual beings. And so that's
absolutely. Okay, so Larry said, for those of you online, and I'm going to forget half of what you just said, but we have the benefit of knowing that we are spiritual beings and not just physical. Maybe perhaps understanding that the Israelites did not have, by the way, which reminds me of one of my favorite passages, and that's after the great roll call of faith in Hebrews 11. We are told that all of these, having been faithful to God, did not receive the promise. We did. We have. Which makes me think that Moses and Abraham may come up to us in heaven and say, what was it like to live knowing that the Son of God had sacrificed himself for you? We didn't know that, but you did, you know. And then Larry went on to say that peace is as I agree, a commodity that is undervalued, I think, by the world. That peace that we have. I had some thought that I think I've completely lost now. Not your fault. It's that lack of sleep, I'm thinking. Thank you.
There seems to be two kinds of testing going on here, where God says, yes, us put me to the test in verse 10, and then there seems to be kind of an evil testing in verse 15, it's the same chapter 3, where they put God to the test of the evildoer.
Yeah, and Tony's bringing up the concept of putting God to the test, and I really think that kind of sums up God's displeasure in this whole book is, the idea that we as man would have the audacity to say, well, what have you done for me lately? Or prove that, or, to put God to the test. I think some of the saddest questions I've ever had asked me of either non-believers or people who are questioning their faith, one of the saddest things is, if I do this evil thing, God has to forgive me, doesn't he? And it's kind of like, well, yeah, if that's the way you want to look at it, I don't want to approach God and say, I'm going to do this bad thing on purpose because you have to forgive me. That's kind of putting God to the test from my way of thinking. God is being put to the test here. And I think that's his displeasure. Any other comments? Yes.
Frank, in chapter 3, verse 11, there's this statement that makes says, I will rebuke the devourer for you, but it will not destroy the fruit of the soil. And a lot of times when we think about blessing, we think about things that God gives us or things that God withholds from us. And here we've got an example of the type of blessing God provides that you don't even see.
Yeah.
He's protecting you without you even knowing that you need protection.
This is a great comment that Ken Palmer just made, and that is verse 11 of chapter 3. He says, I'll rebuke the devourer for your sakes, so that he will not destroy the fruit of your ground. So sometimes we talk about what God does for us or doesn't do for us. Here's an example of him preventing something from happening that might just go unnoticed. And isn't that hopefully our understanding of how God does deal in our lives, the things that we that don't happen to us that we never even know about. Yeah, great point. Anyone else? Just go home and think about that, though. 400 years from this point until the Messiah came. Those who really studied this, and of course we kind of, I think, transitioned from the prophets into the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees being the ones who were in the know over that 400-year period. Were they looking for that Messiah on a daily basis? Did they just completely forget about it? I personally think that when John the Baptist and Jesus came along, some of them certainly recognized who he was. But by that time, it's not exactly what they wanted. Didn't work politically for them. Didn't fit into what they really wanted. I think you cannot explain the contempt that they had for the scribes and the Pharisees that Jesus and, John the Baptist was out speaking in the wilderness, and people came out, and in the middle of him speaking, he stopped and looked over and said, "What are you bunch of snakes doing here?" to the Pharisees. "What are you brood of vipers doing here?" That was kind of unprovoked, other than where they had gotten in their hearts at that point, the point that they had gotten to. I really appreciate you being here and suffering through the minor prophets to the extent that sometimes it's not easy. But I think there are some great lessons that we can take for ourselves from this book. And go out and enjoy the leftovers. We'll see you later.